Hello and welcome back to the Newman Numismatic Portal Symposium 2020. As we're rounding off today for this block, we have Joel Orosz with us. Joel, are you there?
I am, Matthew. Hello.
Absolutely. You should be able to share your video at this point if you want to.
Okay. There I am.
There you are. We will also be joined by Len Augsburger shortly. But in the meantime, Joel, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself for those who might be new or...
Oh, well, happy to do so. I'm rather a geezer in the numismatic field, been around since the early 80s. Probably best known to folks as the numismatic bookie in coin world, and written a number of things over the years about numismatic biography, and especially the numismatics of the 19th century in the United States, the sort of the early years of American numismatics. So that's a little bit about me. And
here's Len.
So I'm Len Augsburger. I'm the project coordinator of Newman Numismatic Portal, and we'll be presenting today on Eric P. Newman's and Ken Bressett's book, Fantastic $1804.
Looking forward to it. At this point, you should be good to share your presentation.
I'll kick it off. Both Len and I have been privileged over the years to know both Eric Newman and Ken Bressett personally, and to have worked with them. I admire them both greatly. And of course, the great book, one of the evergreen references in numismatics that the two of them worked on together, is the fantastic 1804 silver dollar. Now, there are, of course, two versions. You might say it comes in two flavors. The second printing, which we all know and love and have in our libraries, and the rare first printing that is, in fact, almost as rare as an 1804 dollar. So Len and I have worked on two things recently. One is to tell the story of how that first printing of the 1804 fantastic 1804 dollar came to be. And the second piece of it is to conduct a thorough census to see just how many of those few copies, there never were more, as it turns out, than 42, but how many of those we can actually track down and identify today. So I'll be starting off by an introduction to 1804 dollars, and Len will follow through with a story on the books and the outcomes of the census. So starting with this slide, brief history of the 1804 dollars. Naturally, we have to start with a poem, and that's by William Forrester Dunham in his American Numismatic Anthem. I'll do the opening stanza and the closing stanza. The opening stanza: the members of the ANA have gathered to view old and rarely perfect coins with iridescent hue. But the last stanza is the one that's important. Some wander off to encased stamps or paper stuff galore, but the one of all we must desire is the coin of 1804. Dunham wrote that in 1908, and even then, the 1804 dollar was the king of American coins, the great desideratum of every collection. But the funny thing about it is that the 1804 dollar was a mystery from the moment it appeared right up until the time when Ken and Eric wrote the fantastic 1804 silver dollar. We now know that it was first struck in 1834 by order of President Andrew Jackson. But we didn't know this definitively until they published the book in 1962. So let's go back to see how it all happened. The 1804 dollar almost dropped out of the sky in 1842 when Eckfeldt and Dubois wrote their Manual of Gold and Silver Coins of All Nations. There was a picture of an 1804 dollar in that book, and no collector at that point had ever heard of or seen an 1804 dollar. We now know that they were created specifically to be part of proof sets, you might say, as diplomatic gifts for the Middle and Far Eastern powers with which we wanted to form diplomatic relations. Muscat, or today's Oman, Siam, today's Thailand, Koshan, China, today's Vietnam, and Japan. So the mint gets the order from President Jackson, and it says, make up sets for all coins now in circulation. But of course, the problem was that no dollars were being coined in 1834. In fact, no dollars had been coined for 30 years before that. So the mint looked in its records and said, what was the last time we coined a dollar? And they discovered that there were $19,570 delivered in 1804. So they decided, we'll make new 1804 dollar dies and include the dollars in these sets for diplomatic gifts. Ironically, no dollars were actually coined in 1804. All of those 19,500 plus were dated 1803. So the mint recreated a dollar it had never created in the first place. We think about 8 of these silver dollars were made. A couple of them did end up as diplomatic gifts. A couple of others were returned to the mint cabinet. So the mint cabinet of coins, or museum, had about 6 of these dollars that they could then use to trade to leading collectors like Matthew Stickney to get items that they didn't have in the mint collection. So as the last bullet says, trading, restrikes, and chicanery ensue over several decades. So quickly, the 3 varieties of 1804 dollars, the class 1s, or the so-called originals. Remember, there are no original 1804 dollars. Technically, they violate the Mint Act because they were struck in 1834 or 1835, 30 years after the date on the coin itself. Remember, the Mint Act of 1792 said all coins have to carry the date which they were struck. But of course, as a matter of practice, many other early US coins are similar. 8 of them known today, and importantly, all of them have a lettered edge. Then, remember, the Mint was using those 6 leftover class 1 coins for trading stock, and they traded them all to collectors. So we moved to why class 2s were struck. This is in the late 1850s, early 1860s. They were restruck by mint employees using the same obverse die as class 1s, but they had to create a new reverse die. They were struck by mint employees surreptitiously so that they could be sold at a profit to the mint employees. They weren't the brightest of criminals, however. They made two big mistakes. One is they struck them with a plain edge, so they were quite distinct from the Class $1. And the other was that they sold them directly to collectors. So the word got out that the mint was peddling these things. A scandal ensued, and the mint had to recall in embarrassment all of those Class $2 that had been sold. Today, there is exactly one of them known, and that's impounded in the National Numismatic Collection. So we move on to Class $3. What is a Class 3 1804 dollar? Well, it's a Class 2 1804 dollar that has had an edge applied to it. This is late 1860s. Another group of nefarious mint employees, and they learned from the mistakes of their earlier comrades. So they applied an edge to Class 2s to make it look more like a Class 1. And then they sold them through favored dealers so that they didn't directly sell them, John Hazeltine being one of them. Today, there are 7 known Class 3s. So in the 19th century, 1804 dollars are just a total mystery. No one knows where they came from, why they were made. Interestingly, the great dealer Elliott Woodward, W. Elliott Woodward, wrote in the Boston Transcript in 1867 an article that basically got the story right. He in that article, he said the 1804 dollar was created for diplomatic purposes, and he even mentioned one going to the Sultan of Muscat, which was correct. But it was an ephemeral publication. No one ever really verified the story. And over the years, the story was forgotten. Meanwhile, plenty of dust was being kicked up by people who had axes to grind. John Hazeltine, one of those favored dealers that the mint used to sell the coins, the Type 3 coins, insisted that every 1804 dollar was an original 1804 dollar struck in the mint in 1804, even though the fabrics were very inconsistent if you stopped to look at them all. On the other hand, you had dealers like David Prosky, who was not part of the mint distribution network, who said all 1804 dollars are fakes and frauds. He wasn't part of it, so he wanted no part of it. And then, of course, there were the folks who tried to explain why, if the mint records show more than 19,000 coined in 1804, why in the world are so few of them left? And we get all sorts of fanciful stories here, usually involving the entire issue being exported. Sometimes in the story, the ship carrying them sinks. At other times, the ship gets to its destination. And the classic, of course, is that all of them were sent to North Africa to pay the American soldiers fighting against the Barbary pirates. And only a handful of them returned from the shores of Tripoli. So there was, however, one scholar who was trying really to get to the bottom of the story, and that was a guy named John Nexon, who in a series of articles in the American Journal of Numismatics from 1887 to 1905 was able to put together a pretty detailed census of 1804 dollars, and he was able to identify 13 distinct examples. So we move to the 20th century, and we get a young numismatist by the name of Ken Bressett, who takes an interest in this still very mysterious 1804 dollars. He starts with the work Nexon had done, and he undertakes to update it and refine it. And in his work, Ken was able to straighten out a lot of questionable provenances. He discovered a seventh type 1, the child specimen, so that there were now 14 total, 7 of each class. And one day in 1959, Ken got a phone call from the co-curator of the National Numismatic Collection, Elvira Klein Stefanelli, who said, there's a young man by the name of Lynn Glaser who's interested in $1804. You should get together with him. Ken and Glaser got together. They decided to write an article about $1804 together. Then Glaser pulled in his friend Walter Breen to be part of it. Eric Newman soon joined in the fun. And we have these 4 formidable scholars all working on investigating the complete story of the $1804. But as it happened, Glaser and Breen did not contribute terribly much to the research or writing. And then they went off in 1961 to start their own numismatic magazine, the Metropolitan Numismatic Journal. So it really was, in the end, Ken Bressett and Eric Newman who were doing the research, who were doing the writing, who really for almost 2 years worked on this endless mystery of the $1804. And in the end, when it was ready for publication, Ken and Eric rather graciously, I think, gave Glaser and Breen the status of associates in research. Now, a planned digression here, the title of the fantastic $1804, probably the best title in numismatic history. Glaser's suggested working title was Dollar Chicanery. Well, it wasn't exactly something that rang. The title, as we know today, was invented by Evelyn Newman, Eric's wife, who was a philanthropist in St. Louis, but more than that, a philanthropic marketer. She really had a sharp eye for promotion, for branding, for making things stick. And she came up with this punning title of the fantastic $1804. Fantastic in both of its meanings. In the modern sense, which is synonymous with great or wonderful, but also in the traditional sense, which is a product of a fantasy, something that's unbelievable or unrealistic. And it fit very well because Eric and Ken had come to the conclusion that the coin was an illegitimate issue, and that sort of fit the product of a fantasy definition. But yet it had grown to be considered great and wonderful by so many people. And just as a quick example of Evelyn's wit, the bottom bullet there in that 1938 radio program that Eric was going to do, she thought it was quite a dry presentation and suggested entitling it Chili Con Coins. So we move now to August 15th, 1962. This is the point at which Eric and Ken have essentially finished their book. And here are the major findings that they have made. First of all, they did expand Nexon's census to 14 pieces with extensive pedigrees laid out. They demonstrated that the class 1 pieces were produced around 1834 or 5 using a collar to strike, whereas the early silver dollars were struck without a collar. They demonstrated that the class 2 pieces were struck around 1859, the different reverse and the blank edges. And of course, the class 3 pieces really being class 2 pieces with the lettered edge applied later. And crucially, this last conclusion, they concluded that the diplomatic origin of the 1834 coin sets was confirmed by documents from the National Archives, but they could not find any confirmation that these sets included 1804 dollars. So they knew they were sets, but not including, as far as they could tell, 1804 dollars. So one of the chapters in that first printing is the diplomatic gift illusion or delusion. They just didn't think 1804 dollars were there. So here we are, August 16th, 1962, the evening. There are going to be 4 presentations, educational presentations at the ANA convention. And one of them is by David Spink and James Risk, and it's going to be entitled New Facts on an Old American Coin. Ken Bressett is in the audience to listen to this. And by the way, Ken Bressett has been informed that the next morning, the 17th, he will have a box of the new books delivered to him. So Whitman has already started printing the books that has, as chapter 9, the diplomatic gift delusion. And what does Ken learn when he is sitting in that educational presentation? That Spink has had consigned to them the King of Siam set, which includes, as one of its parts, an 1804 dollar. Here it is, proof positive that these sets included 1804 dollars. And of course, it adds yet another, an 8th class 1 to the census. How good was the provenance? It was so good that, in fact, the set was consigned by the descendants of Anna Leonowens, the Anna of Anna and the King of Siam. So it was romantic as well as airtight in its provenance. So what does Ken Bressett do? Ken Bressett walks up, congratulates David Spink on a superb talk and a wonderful new discovery. He walks out of the meeting room, goes up to a pay phone, those of you who remember the existence of such things, calls up the printing plant in Hannibal and literally says, stop the presses. Stop the presses, because Ken realizes that those 16 books that are going to be delivered to him the next morning are now absolutely obsolete. They will have to be rewritten. But Ken also recognizes that those copies, though they're obsolete, are going to instantly become collector's items. And with that, I turn it over to Len.
All right. So of these initially produced copies, we know that 16 were with Ken Bressett at the ANA in Detroit. Some unknown number of those were distributed by him at the convention. And we know Eric was sent the next day, I believe, 2 copies by special delivery in St. Louis. And then after that, when Ken got back to work, there were some leftover pages, and they said, what should we do with them? And he said, well, go ahead and bind them up. We're not sure the count of those, somewhere around 20, possibly 24. And without knowing the provenance of a specific copy, there's no way to tell which group it came from. We do know a couple of them were part of the batch that Ken had at the Detroit ANA. He gave a copy to David Spink. That was one of them. And we know the Dick Johnson copy is another one. So, how to tell these apart. In the first printing, chapter 8 is called The Origin of the 1804 Originals, and then in the second printing, that's changed to the diplomatic gift background. And again, at the time of the first printing, it was thought the diplomatic gift story that traced back to Woodward was a delusion. They had to change that now that they knew it was in actuality, it was fact. And then there's another minor binding difference between the first and second printings. The text block is bound flat on the first printing, and in the second printing, it's more curved. This is a lot more evident when you put a first and second edition side by side. All right, and then here's the difference in the table of contents. That's probably the easiest and quickest way to tell them apart, is that first edition refers to the diplomatic gift delusion, and now in the final edition, that's become the diplomatic gift background. All right, so there are a few clusters of these copies. The first one, as illustrated here, these are inscribed bound page proofs ready for correction, and correct them we did. A couple weeks after the ANA convention, Ken visited Eric in St. Louis to work through all the changes, and they also took that opportunity to inscribe some of these first edition copies. A few weeks later, Eric requests a few more copies, and this group appears to all be dated September 12th, 1962. Now, with coins, it's all about keeping them pristine and not putting any marks on them and being in super original condition. With books, it's a little bit different story. With books, inscriptions actually enhance the value. They lend additional historicity to the artifact. And the other nice thing is that they become more traceable. Because even with these clusters of inscriptions, there will be slight differences in the spacing or different flourishes of the pen, and these can all be differentiated when you look at them closely. All right, so Joel and I have put together a census of these first edition copies. We think the original mintage, if you will, was somewhere around 40. We've identified 30 distinct specimens. Greatly due to the fact that Newman and Bressett saved most, if not all, of the related correspondence, and we've had access to that. In addition, Newman Portal itself has been very helpful in tracking down mentions of copies in Coin World, numismatic literature auction catalogs, and other resources. And then also, Joel and I put out a call for information in the e-Asylum for owners to step forth if they wish to have their copy included in the census, and got good response from that. So we've gotten up to 31 distinct examples. We will be publishing this in the Numismatic Bibliomania Society journal, the Asylum, probably this fall. So I'm not going to go through all 31, but I do want to highlight a few of the special copies. The strongest claim to the sort of the first copy known would be the one that Ken Bressett gave to David Spink. We know this copy was in the UK as of 1962 because Spink wrote a letter, I believe it was to Newman, just acknowledging that he had a copy and that he got it from Ken. And then there are a couple other copies we know were given away at the Detroit ANA. The Dick Johnson copy is very interesting. It was signed by Ken at the ANA and given to Dick. And by chance, Dick happened to be flying to St. Louis that day. And Eric met him at the airport and signed Dick's copy. And that copy is still in the Johnson collection 60 plus years later. Lois Cole was a numismatist active in South Carolina in the 50s. She was at the ANA, and Ken personally recalled giving a copy to her. That one, we don't know where it is. Presumably it was inscribed. Newman and Bressett gave each other copies and inscribed them. Ken still has his copy, which Eric inscribed, "No one could do this job alone," which is exactly the sort of thing Eric would say. He was all very much about collaboration and working together and achieving greater things by bringing in other collaborators. There was a copy inscribed by Bressett to Newman that was sold as part of the Newman Library, and currently resides in the Hamelberg Library. And that one has an extensive inscription. All right, Joel has a copy which was signed by Ken and a little bit later by Eric. This was actually a working copy that was used by Whitman for corrections. From the original first edition, they had to change about 70 pages. And so they pasted in corrections, and possibly some were done by hand as well, into this working copy that was used by Whitman to prepare the final edition. Joel acquired this from Charlie Davis several years ago at the ANA. All right, a couple what I call mystery copies. Eric had some copies in the publisher's original brown paper wrapping, identified as first printing copies, but the wrapping was not opened. This is sort of reminiscent. You get these unopened basketball card packs and baseball card packs that for some reason carry additional market value, even though no one's absolutely sure what's inside them. But in any case, the way this worked was there were a number of these, and when David was cataloging the sale, he did open one or two of them just to verify that they were in fact first edition. But a couple of them were sold still in the original Whitman brown paper wrapping, so those are out there. A few copies have circulated within the families. Ken Bressett gave one to his son Phil Bressett. It's inscribed 1978. Eric gave one to his son Andy Newman, dated October 62, and that one is still in the family. And then we have finally an honorable mention. This is not a first printing, but it's a second printing copy that Wayne Amron owns, and it's been signed by both authors, Newman and Bressett, in addition to the two research associates, Breen and Glazer. Wayne noted that Glazer was very surprised to get a request for a signature, but Wayne sent him the book, and Lynn signed it, and as far as I know, this is the only one that has all 4 signatures in it. So that one's probably unique. So if anyone else is out there that has one of these copies, hasn't reported it to us, we'd very much enjoy hearing about that. And as I noted, we'll be writing these up and submitting to the Asylum for publication this fall. So one other note I would like to add, so in the Newman sale, there were 6 or 7 of these, and to be honest, it actually depressed the market a little bit. So this is actually a good time to acquire one of these if you have any interest. So definitely an opportunity there. All right, I think we will open it up for questions. So I'm going to stop sharing and go over to the Q&A.
And would you like to handle questions, or?
You can, I'm actually not seeing them. So if you see anything, yeah, you can go ahead.
Absolutely. Remember that you can submit questions using the Q&A feature on your device. All right, first question coming in. How do you think Woodward found out about the real story?
Wow, that is a great question. Woodward, of course, was one of the leading scholarly dealers of the 1860s and 70s and 80s. He certainly was well connected to a lot of different sources, and apparently one of them was able to give him that story. Unfortunately, in the actual story in the Boston transcript, he did not cite any sources, so we can't say for sure where he got it. But,
and just speculating, I think the most likely source would have been the Mint Cabinet curator.
Oh, Dubois.
But if if Woodward had identified the source, that might have raised more questions than he wanted to. But apparently, he felt at least comfortable enough to repeat the information.
Oh, I see.
But Dubois seems like the most likely person that would have known.
That seems likely. The next question says, how have any of the bound page proofs been sold through private sales, or is it all auctions?
I'm sure a lot of them have been sold privately. Of course, we don't have any place to search for those records. So what we've identified are, a lot of auction sales and other reports that have come into us. But yeah, and I'm sure a lot of them have traded privately.
And it's certainly possible, given the fact that they look on the cover exactly like the second printing. It's entirely possible that people have inadvertently sold them and maybe inadvertently bought them, thinking they were the second printing, when in fact they were the first.
True. Next question is asking, is there any way you can show the cover and back of the books that you're describing, or maybe where to find images of those?
Yeah, so we had a cover in the slide deck, and the covers all look the same.
Yeah, they're all that brown Kaivar material with silver lettering, and a very understated kind of look. No embellishments whatever. But it's sort of the classic that stood the test of time. While Len is pulling that up, I should mention we are profoundly grateful to Ken Bressett, who has helped us through this. It's sort of been like writing a biography of Thomas Jefferson. And having Thomas Jefferson still with us, you can call up Monticello and say, hey, are we right on this point? So Ken has corrected a number of errors and misleading thoughts that we had. And we're very grateful to him for saving us from ourselves. There we go. Yeah, that's it. It's just that the silver lettering on the cover. The back cover is blank. The spine also blank. So just that silver lettering on the cover.
Oh, love that. Another question asker asks, what % of copies are unsigned? If you could estimate.
I would guess 2/3 of them are signed. Yeah.
That sounds about right.
And some of them are signed, only by Ken and only by Eric. And then some are signed by both.
And the range of time, you know, most that are signed were signed in 1962, but as you can see, some were signed subsequently.
I see. Following up, this next one is a question, but what a cool story. It was nice to hear it live, much nicer than just reading it out loud. Thanks, Joel and Lynn. Following that, have you all cataloged auction appearances? Sorry if already answered.
Yeah, the article that we're writing will contain the auction appearances,
including some auction appearances that we can't tie to a specific book that is in existence right now. For instance, I recall an early David Sklow auction that it has a description. Clearly, it's a first printing, but we can't tie it to a specific one in the census.
I see. Next question asker wants to know, for the benefit of newer collectors in this field, could you please explain again when the $1804 Class 1 was minted and how did it violate the Mint Act? And could you mention other coins that have also violated the Mint Act?
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Len.
Yeah, the Mint Act, you know, is very clear that, you know, coins will be dated the year they were struck. And that did not happen with the $1804. Also, many of the early bust coins and early copper we know was coined typically the following year. That's actually dated on it. The practicalities of making dies in the early mint were such that if you had a working die, you really did not want to put it on the shelf. And if you had a working die and then you ran out of copper, but you know 6 months later the calendar changed, but you got a new shipment of copper, you used the old die. It was just a practical matter. And David Rittenhouse or the subsequent mint directors, they probably knew what they were doing, but just made a executive decision. This is how it's going to be.
I see. Following that, were the Mint employees who made the Class 2 dollars fired? Is there any recording of that?
It's certainly not that we've ever been able to find. The ethics at the Mint have improved considerably since the 19th century, and there were, and we should make a distinction. The Class 1 dollars that were traded to enhance the Mint cabinet, that was ethically okay because they were trading coins that were duplicates in order to get coins they did not have for the Mint cabinet but needed, and that was not done for personal gain. But the Type 2s in the late 1850s, early 1860s, and the Type 3s in the late 1860s, that was done for personal gain. And I don't know, Len, do you know of anyone who was ever disciplined for it? I don't.
No, there's an analogous situation with the 1913 nickel, which was almost certainly struck surreptitiously by Samuel Brown. He was eventually fired from the Mint, but not for making those nickels, which nobody knew about, but he was fired for cause. But with respect to the $1804, no, we have no information.
Understood. Why did they mint the year as 1804 and not the current year?
Well, there had not been any silver dollars struck by the Mint since 1803, and it seemed kind of awkward to them to create a current date like 1835 silver dollar when none had been authorized to be struck in 1835. So they thought, oh, if we go back to the last year that we authorized and struck dollars, that'd be appropriate, even though doing that clearly violated Section 10 of the 1792 Mint Act by having, and this was a vocabulary word that Ken and Eric introduced us to, a novidel. That is technically what the 1804 dollar is, a coin that is struck after the year in which it is dated, inside the mint, a novidel.
The other curious thing there is that it tells us something about the state of the mint cabinet at that time. Now, apparently they looked back in the records and said, okay, well, we struck, 19,000 of these in 1804, so we'll just make some more of those. But the mint cabinet at that time would not have had an 1804 dollar because they didn't exist yet. So that should have raised a question, but for whatever reason didn't.
And it's very curious too. There is a travel account by the Prince of Saxe-Weimar, a man named Bernhard, who visited the mint in 1826. And in his account of that visit to the mint, he clearly says, no silver dollars have been coined at this facility since 1803. So when he visited the mint in 1826, somebody there knew that they hadn't coined any silver dollars in 1804. And as Len says, there wouldn't have been an example in the cabinet because they never made one. So somehow they dropped the ball just 7 years later when the order came down from Jackson and did 1804 instead of 1803.
Yeah, we can probably blame all of that on Adam Eckfeldt.
Yeah, that's probably true. What he remembered and what he didn't.
Yeah.
So the Class 2 is struck over an 1857 Swiss shooting thaler. Are any of the other 1804s known to have undertypes?
Yeah, no, they're not, but it's typical. I mean, for some of those mint coins in the period to have these undertypes. There is a Gobrick dollar, I believe, has an undertype. So the mint, they would just grab whatever was on hand. If they were the midnight minters or whoever it was, wouldn't necessarily be real discriminating about the planchet that they used.
It was certainly easier to grab a Swiss shooting thaler than it was to make a new planchet from scratch. So very, very quick and simple to do it, especially if you're doing it when your supervisor isn't looking.
True. Looks like there's a comment here. There is another book about the 1804 dollar by Mark Ferguson focusing on the Dexter example. It presents additional information about this elusive coin.
Right, so there's a number of books out there. Dave Bowers wrote one, and of course the fantastic 1804 dollar itself, and Mark Ferguson also wrote a book. I may even be missing one. This is one of these coins that there's multiple books written about.
Absolutely. So it looks like we still have about 10 minutes of time if we want to submit any more questions. And while we wait for some, I am curious for those attendees here, you can use the raised hand feature to raise a hand for this. I am curious as to how many of you have attended 3 or more of the talks today. It's great to see. We at least about half have attended over 3 today. Certainly glad to see you all enjoy, and I know for myself personally have learned quite a bit just within these past 2 days. A lot of great speakers and a lot of great talks here.
Yeah, just before this, I was watching Greg Rohan, and it was just a great, really interesting inside baseball kind of view of what's going on in the rare coin market right now. In some aspects, it's very healthy, but there are some challenges too.
So I believe this next question asker is asking, what would a price of a book compare to the more common version, or maybe?
Sure. The common version, I'm sure you can get on AB Books for probably $10. The first printing ones were in the $300–400 range, but in the Newman sale, a couple of them sold a little bit less than that. A couple of them, special copies, sold for a lot more, but maybe your average copy might have been, you know, $200 or $250 in the Newman sale. But, you know, from this point, it's going to be, you know, just onesies, twosies coming out. So they'll be a little bit more challenging.
Absolutely.
It's probably worth noting the irony that Eric Newman, of course, formed one of the great American numismatic collections of all time. In one of the coins that it did not contain was an 1804 dollar. Eric felt that Ken had conclusively shown that the 1804 dollar was a novidel, not a real American coin. And who would want to own a coin like that when you could have a real rarity, like a 1794 dollar or 1792 half deem, et cetera, et cetera. Well, needless to say, the book did not destroy the market value of $1804. Anything but.
I see. Next question asker wants to know, what is the next book we can expect from the Orosz Augsburger duo?
Len, do you want to field that one?
I would just say that Joel is very engaged with his grandkids, and I'm very engaged with Newman Portal. So we're not going to make any commitments today. Let's put it that way.
Understandable. Now, with all this research that's been going in, what have been some of the trickier bits of information or trickier sources to find throughout this, getting the research for this?
This one's been pretty straightforward, and the reason is that Ken and Eric saved everything, and it's almost like shooting fish in a barrel. You go through their papers, and the information is there. Some of the other subjects we've gotten into, we've had to go visit a lot of archives that weren't necessarily that well organized, and just dig through a lot of stuff. But this particular project's been pretty straightforward, and you know, especially with the resources we have today on Newman Portal, that just opens up a whole lot of stuff that would have been very difficult to access before. So.
Yeah, I think we all today look like we're much smarter than we look like 20 years ago, because my gosh, the Newman Portal, you know, especially when you think of auction catalogs and coins that show up in obscure auction catalogs like Massamore's sales or something like that. You know, it used to be you'd have to go to the ANS to find that out. And now, in the safety of your own COVID hidey hole, you can get it all from the Newman Portal. Amazing stuff.
When Martin Gengerke wrote his book on American numismatic auction sale catalogs in 1990, was the 8th edition, he had identified 18,000 sale catalogs at that point in time. And the idea of getting them all in one place online just never even occurred to anyone. But today, Newman Portal has 10,000 auction sale catalogs accessible. And the idea that we could get all of them is not ridiculous.
That's fantastic.
Wow.
All right, I think we just have time for a couple more questions before we close out here. This next one is mentioning that my book copy has the number 9376 on the title page. Do you think this is consecutive numbering? How many total copies?
9376, I'm almost sure was the Whitman stock number. Ken Bressett would know for sure, but I'm 99% sure that's what it is. In fact, I'm going to show you a box here. This is a stock box used for Eric Newman's early paper money. Well, our artificial intelligence is preventing me from showing this box here. If I put it right in front of the camera, see if that helps.
We get tantalizing glimpses.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Here, okay, there we go.
Oh, yep, there's the
So
stock.
this is an original Whitman stock box for Newman's early paper money of America. It has 9355 on it. So I think that's the answer.
All right.
And I have a memory that about 8,000 copies of the second printing were initially printed in 1962. That's a pretty hefty number.
Yeah, I think that's the number Ken gave us. And of course, you know, at that time, these kind of books would have been sold at retailers all over the country. A lot of, you know, drugstores would have a rack full of Whitman holders that people would buy. So they would, you know, put a few of these books out there too and see if they would sell. So they had a national retail distribution network at that point in time. Still do, but in the early 60s, the coin consciousness of the country was much higher than it is today, and there are a lot more outlets for numismatic retail merchandise.
Absolutely. Oh, this next question asker wants to know, Matthew, are you a collector? I am not currently a collector, but over these past couple days, after learning so much, I feel pretty confident and have certainly garnered some interest in collecting, and feel pretty confident now, at least, to keep an eye out for legit coins. Have been introduced to it, and it's been a really interesting field.
Excellent.
Welcome to numismatics.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And so as we close out, are there any closing statements you all would like to leave off with for today?
Well,
Yeah, go ahead, Len.
yeah, I was just going to say, in the spirit of Newman, we'll thank our collaborators and all the people who furnished information for this article, and we'll see the fruit of our efforts fairly soon here.
And I would just like to point out that there was a 50th anniversary tribute edition published by Whitman that, you know, reprinted the fantastic 1804 dollar along with some new material. And in 2 years, we'll be getting to the 60th anniversary of the publication. So if Dennis Tucker is out there listening, sounds like another anniversary edition is in order.
Well, that sounds fantastic. Well, you heard it here. And so this is the final presentation for today. We do have one more day of presentations tomorrow for the symposium. Thank you all again for tuning in to not just this, but the many other presentations for today. And we hope to see you all again tomorrow. Thank you again, Joel and Lynn, for the great presentation and for all the work that you put into this.
Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you, Matthew. So long, everyone.
All right, goodbye.